Hello YouTube. In this hypertrophy series, I'm going to discuss with you tonnage accumulation and high quality volume when it comes to backup sets. So first off, backup sets, most people do them the same way, which is you do a compound movement for something that is going to be qualified as strength work, and then you're going to take a lower weight for the same movement and you're going to do additional sets of that. And it's a very good method actually. Most people come up with it by themselves, they don't really have to learn about it just because it makes a ton of sense. So what ends up happening is you're warm from the strength work, so you don't have to warm up for a new lift, you're already warm, so you can jump into the new lift without wasting any time and you can accumulate more and more volume. There's going to be a slight lack of intensity when it comes to backup sets in general because you're already pre-fatigued by the strength work, and that's normal, that should happen. And for the most part, people are going to tend to do their backup sets in higher rep ranges. That by itself sometimes creates an issue because people end up doing only their intensity for the strength work and only their volume for the backup sets, and they never switch it up, which can result in a lack of progression after a while because it's limiting your ability to program. So just keep that in mind. You don't necessarily have to abide by those principles. If you wanted, you could have a strength work that is going to be higher rep ranges and then backup sets that are going to be low rep ranges, but still have the strength work in a higher absolute intensity window. And the difference between absolute and relative intensity windows I will eventually explain in a video, but it's not rocket science. You understand that if you have a very high weight that you rep for 8 reps, and then you take a lower weight that you do for 3 reps, even though the second weight is lower intensity in terms of the rep selection, the weight dictates the intensity. So it's going to be lower intensity. So that's something to keep in mind. That's a perfectly valid way to do backup sets. Just make sure that they stay challenging. Too many people, I see that at the gym all the time, they're going to do their walking sets on the bench with, I don't know, 205 for sets of 6 or 7, and then they just take a plate off and they do 135 for as many reps as possible. That's a burnout set, that's a finisher. It's not a backup set because it's in a completely irrelevant intensity window. You don't want to do that. You want a strict correlation between the weight you use for the strength work and for the backup set. They need to make sense. And it depends from people to people. I can't give you a strict number. Some would say, oh, you take off, I don't know, 50, 60 pounds on your deadlift, for example, between the strength work and the backup set. In reality, it depends. It depends on you. And the best way to know is just to experiment. What is going to represent a rep range that once you're already fatigued from the strength work is going to be relevant? What is going to push you to failure within a rep range that makes sense? That is what matters. And then the set selection is going to be the same. I suggest people don't go overboard on backup sets. There's no point in doing 10 sets of backup sets. Do between 3 to 4 and you'll be fine. So that's in general what people do. And as I said, it's perfectly valid. But there are other ways to approach backup sets. And in one of my training videos, I showcase one of these ways. And people were, some of them curious, some of them furious, which really goes to show that people don't like it when you go against the grain. And the reason why was I used the term speed in the title of my video, and the title was speed pause. And people told me that what I was doing wasn't speed pause, which they were right and wrong at the same time. What I was doing wasn't speed work, that's true. But speed is an adjective, right? And it's an adjective that I utilize for my backup sets because it's the value that is going to dictate progression, which is why I call them that. So that's the explanation behind that. It's not controversial. And I'm going to explain to you how to do it because it's a method that I personally really like. So, on one hand, you have the method I previously described for the backup sets. You have two other ways to approach it. One that is going to be just a branch out of the first method, and another one that is going to be completely different. So I'm going to start with the branch out. When you do a backup set, you also have the choice to do a variation of the lift. And the further away from specificity you use the lift, the more you might have to warm up again the more the intensity relation is going to be different and the more the weight selection is going to differ too. I suggest people do their back of sets within as close as a specificity range and relation as they can. Meaning that if you do back squat and then you do a front squat, in my opinion, that's not a back of set, it's a brand new set of exercise because you will have to re-warm up for the most part. So you want to stay close. So for example, for a back squat, something that is going to be close but not the same lift will be a post squat. That to me is a great variation. For the deadlift, you can do post deadlifts, you can do deficit deadlifts. For the bench, you can do a post bench, you can do a close grip bench. Close grip bench starts being a little bit far in specificity. You can do a spoto press. All of these could be used as backup sets, okay? The only difference is that they are not going to feed off of the main lift as much when in terms of pure specificity because they don't replicate the tempo or the form, technique, the width of the hands, etc. Does it mean that they're worthless? No. Why? Because they could help you work around certain issues. For example, overuse injuries. If you modify the grip on the bench, for example, it can alleviate the weight on the shoulders. And it can also help you work on some strength curve or form technique issues. For example, if you struggle at the bottom of the squat, I encourage you to do your back of sets as a pose squat because it's going to help in that respect. So it's sort of up to you. It's something that I personally really like to utilize in terms of back of sets for certain lifts. For example, on the squat, I will always do pose squats instead of just straight up squats, and on the bench as well. Now, I have my own reasons for that. Mine being that I am not super focused on pushing my bench and squat numbers because the hypertrophy that it would bring me is not super interesting for me right now. Because the muscle groups that are going to develop from it, the chest and the quads, I have plenty of that, and those are not my focuses. So it's going to be up to you. It's going to be up to what you want to favor. Do you want to favor progression on your strength work? In that sense, in that aspect, you need to do your back of sets in the same style. But if you don't, you can switch it up. So that's the first thing that you can do as a back of set. That is just a branching out of the first method. The second one that is completely different is going to be what I do, which I just call speed. It's not speed work, it's not speed technique, it's just speed. And I use that term, why? Because the speed aspect of the lift is what's going to give me the progression. What I mean by that is, I don't train the characteristic of speed. I don't care about it. The speed is what is going to make me put weight on the bar or not. So it's always in relation with hypertrophy. And the comparison between the first application of back of sets and mine, quote unquote, because I know some people have already done that in the past, is that for back of sets, you're going to apply rep ranges and you're going to apply goals within the rep range that are going to trigger a progression in weight. That's standard. It's what you should be doing most of the time in your program, 99% of the time. That's standard progressive overload. Thing is, it's what you already do in the strength work. And there is an issue here. And I think for a lot of people, that issue just flies above their head. They don't even think about it. It's going to be tough to push progression on both the strength work and the back of sets. And I do think that at some point you need to make a choice. And if you do the two different sets within the same style, back squat and then back squats again with a lower intensity, what should be promoted here is evident. It's the strength work. But if the strength work keeps progressing, you understand that since the intensity goes up with the strength work, by default, with the same weight and the same rep range, the intensity goes up for the back of set. Which means what? It's going to be much tougher to progress on it. Eventually, it's going to trickle down, and naturally, the back of set is going to increase, but not as much as it would be if you try to prioritize it. If you do the branching out method that I described, in that case, that's different. Why? There's enough of a gap of specificity that you could potentially choose to put the onus of progression on the back of set. So for example, you could just stay at the same weight, same reps for your normal back squat and push the back of set. And in that case, the return on investment is going to be less. Meaning that I do think that in that sense, in that direction, the trickle down is going to be less important. Why? Because you lift less weight, you get less quality tonnage overall. But from a technical standpoint, from an overuse injury standpoint, it's more beneficial. So those are the two different sides of the back of sets, the original ones that are going to be based on rep range progressions. Keep that in mind because many people don't even think about that twice. As far as the speed application for the progression, what you're going to do is quite simple. You're going to do your strength work as usual with the normal style, and then you're going to do 3 to 4 sets of a back off set. Okay, so you're just going to do the same exact exercise. The only difference is that you are going to do it for speed, meaning that your goal needs to be that every single rep goes at the same speed. And this is also something that I've discussed in the comments of the deadlift video where people just didn't get it. Speed is subjective, and I'm not going to get into if whether strength work works or not because I'm not a powerlifter, I am not qualified for that. But for bodybuilding and hypertrophy, it's not something you should be doing. Meaning that if you do it for hypertrophy and for quality tonnage, well, you're lifting what, 40% of your 1 rep max, and you try to be as fast as possible, but that speed is not going to result in higher quality tonnage, so it's junk volume essentially. And if you do that to specialize in strength, I think it's a waste of time. I think strength blocks for hypertrophy are not useful, and bodybuilders shouldn't really do that because it's going to sabotage your ability to stabilize tonnage. And I will make a full video on that because it's an interesting topic. But keep these two things in mind because the application of speed that I utilize is outside of that. You are going to pick a weight that is going to go up without a grind. And that's an important notion. But it's going to be much, much higher than 40%. Much higher. It should be. Why? It's quality tonnage. We still want to do something that's challenging, but you're going to do it in a smaller rep range. I highly encourage the 3 to 4 rep. If you start to go higher, you're going to start resembling too much of a back off set, and also the higher rep range you do, the more you're going to essentially create a situation where you will grind at some point because the range is too big now. So for example, for my speed pulls, I do 3 reps. That's it. And for the sets, I do 4 sets. And the goal and the scheme of this entire thing is every single rep needs to be as quick as the last. They need to be similar in technique. And if there is a grind, there is no progression, meaning that you will not let yourself put weight on that bar until every single rep of every single set gets up without trouble. And you might think, well, that's an irrelevant intensity window then. No. Why? Because the rep that is going to represent the situation where you start grinding might be very close to a failure. And the more you repeat the sets, the more you're going to realize that. It's something that you need to experience to understand. Once you start focusing on speed, the failure is going to creep up on you much more than if you would just rep normally. So you're going to end up, by default, at the end of the sets, in higher intensity windows that you would have previously thought were possible. But you're still going to be doing things that are fairly easy in a sense because if it weren't, you would be grinding. So once you can get all of your sets with no grind, then you add weight. You understand that this means that progression on this is going to be sabotaged completely. You will barely progress on that, which means what? If you apply that type of principle to your back of sets, it needs to mean one of two things. Either you have a strength work parameter put in place for that lift that is extremely aggressive, that pushes progression, or you don't care about that lift. That's also possible. And the advantage of that style is that it's very fast, so it's easy to accumulate a high quality tonnage. It focuses on technique, so it's sort of the same thing as the branching out, because if you mess up with your technique, you're gonna grind because you're going to be your leverages are going to be poor, etc. And as far as lift like the deadlifts are concerned, to me, I would much rather do that than doing back off sets. It's just my personal preference, but I think you should try it. As far as applying that speed principle to something else, you will only really be able to apply it to main compound movements, meaning that the bench, the squat, the deadlift, the overhead press, should be your main culprits. Don't really try to do that with rows. You can if you want, but I don't advise it. You can do it with weighted pull-ups as well. That's something that would actually work. And eventually what you're going to find with these is that you end up testing the muscular endurance a lot. And as far as the difference between the branching out of the back of set that I described, you understand also that because it's going to be a speed move, you cannot utilize certain variations. You cannot do it with a pause squat, for example. A pause squat entails you're going to pause, so you cannot go fast. Can you do it with a front squat? Yes, you can. Can you do it with something like a close grip? Yes, you can. It's up to you. Understand that the deeper you go in the exercise selection and the more you're going to estrange yourself from the specificity of the compound movement, the less of a help it's going to give you in terms of progressing on that one thing. So it's all about that. It's all about the relationship between the strength work and the back of set, because that's what really matters. You will get good volume for the back of set, but what really matters is, do you want the back of set to feed the strength work, or do you want the strength work to feed the back of set? Because they're both going to result in tonnage increase, but in different fashions. And for me, as far as deadlift goes, the best solution I came up with was this, what I just described. So I'm going to leave you with that. Keep that in mind. Absolutely do your back of sets for the main movements. If you want to progress, it's just free tonnage. It's low. The injury risk is super low. The fatigue management is high. It is a must do for hypertrophy. Thank you for watching. Have a good day.